From Pacifica, this is Democracy Now!
There's nothing in what General Flynn did in terms of conducting himself that was an issue. What came down to, plain and simple, was him misleading the vice president and others and not having a firm grasp on his recollection of that. That's it.
Less than a month after Trump took the oath of office, the White House may be facing its biggest crisis yet, following the resignation of National Security Advisor Michael Flynn over his calls to Russia amidst reports that members of Trump's team made repeated contact with Russian intelligence officials before the November election. We'll speak with Democratic Congressman Ted Lieu of California. Then we look at one of Donald Trump's most powerful advisors, Stephen Miller, a 31-year-old former aide to Senator Jeff Sessions.
The end result of this, though, is that our opponents, the media, and the whole world will soon see, as we begin to take further actions, that the powers of the president to protect our country are very substantial and will not be questioned.
We'll look at how Stephen Miller went from pestering Latina students to designing Trump's immigration policy. We'll speak with one of his former classmates and a reporter at Univision. All that and more coming up. Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. The Washington Post reports the White House is in full-blown crisis following the resignation of former National Security Advisor Michael Flynn. On Tuesday, the White House admitted that President Trump knew for weeks Flynn had discussed sanctions in a call on December 29th with the Russian ambassador and then lied to Vice President Mike Pence and other top White House officials about it. The New York Times and CNN are now reporting phone records and intercepted calls show that members of Donald Trump's presidential campaign had repeated contacts with senior Russian intelligence officials in the lead-up to the November election. The New York Times reports U.S. law enforcement and intelligence agencies intercepted the communications around the time they were discovering evidence that Russia was trying to disrupt the presidential election by hacking into the Democratic National Committee. These advisors include Trump's former campaign chair, Paul Manafort, and former Trump advisor Carter Page. According to the New York Times, call records show Manafort was in touch with Russian officials before the election. The publication of the Times expose came only hours after White House Press Secretary Sean Spicer denied anyone from the Trump campaign was in touch with Russia before the election. During the press conference, Spicer also refused to say when Trump became aware of the contents of Flynn's phone call with the Russian ambassador, saying instead Flynn had simply lost the president's trust.
We got to a point not based on a legal issue, but based on a trust issue, where the level of trust between the president and General Flynn had eroded to the point where he felt he had to make a change.
While the White House has acknowledged Trump knew about Flynn's discussion of sanctions after former acting Attorney General Sally Yates warned the administration weeks ago, many are questioning whether Trump, in fact, knew at the very time of the call. On December 30th, the day after the call, Trump tweeted, quote, "Great move on delay by V. Putin. I always knew he was very smart," unquote. On Tuesday morning, President Trump initially responded to Michael Flynn's resignation by tweeting, quote, "The real story here is why are there so many illegal leaks coming out of Washington? Will these leaks be happening as I deal on North Korea, etc.?" question mark. Lawmakers are now calling for an investigation. Michigan Congressman John Conyers and Maryland Congressman Elijah Cummings said in a statement, quote, "We in Congress need to know who authorized his actions, permitted them, and continued to let him have access to our most sensitive national security information despite knowing these risks. We need to know who else within the White House is a current and ongoing risk to our national security," unquote. We'll have more on Flynn's resignation after headlines. The Office of Government Ethics says Counselor to the President Kellyanne Conway committed a clear violation of federal ethics rules when she used a TV appearance on Fox and Friends last week to market merchandise sold by President Trump's daughter, Ivanka.
30
Go
seconds.
buy Ivanka's stuff is what I would tell. I hate shopping. I'm gonna go get some on myself today. It's a wonderful line. I own some of it. I'm gonna give a free commercial here. Go buy it today, everybody. You can find it online.
In a letter released Tuesday, Office of Government Ethics Director Walter Schaub called on the White House to investigate Conway and consider disciplining her. Last Thursday, following Conway's free commercial on Fox and Friends, Conway told CNN she spoke to Trump and he stands behind her 100%. Conway's also under fire this morning after BuzzFeed reported Conway tweeted "Love you" to an apparent white nationalist on Valentine's Day. The Twitter user LibHypocrisy has a bio that reads, quote, "Hate anti-American liberals, Marxists and commies, #white identity, #nationalist," unquote. It also includes an image of Pepe the Frog, which the Anti-Defamation League has classified as a hate symbol. LibHypocrisy tweeted at Conway Tuesday, quote, "Your strength and resiliency in face of vile hatred, bigotry, and sexism of the unhinged left is a daily inspiration. Love you," unquote. Conway retweeted the message and added "love you" back. President Trump also signed legislation Tuesday to repeal a Dodd-Frank anti-corruption measure requiring oil and mining companies to disclose payments to governments.
And this is HJ Resolution 41, disapproving the Securities and Exchange Commission's rule on disclosure of payments by resource extraction issuers. It's a big deal. We're bringing back jobs big league. We're bringing them back at the plant level. We're bringing them back at the mine level. The energy jobs are coming back.
The rule had required public oil, gas, and mineral extraction companies to disclose annually its payments to both foreign governments and the U.S. government. Lawmakers say these disclosures help fight corruption in resource-rich countries. The oil industry had fiercely lobbied against the measure. Politico reports longtime ExxonMobil CEO Rex Tillerson, who's now the Secretary of State, personally lobbied against the rule, flying to Washington, D.C. to meet with then-Senator Richard Lugar in 2010 to try to get the measure removed from Dodd-Frank. President Trump is meeting with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu today. A U.S. official told reporters Tuesday Trump may not focus on a two-state solution as the path to peace between Israelis and Palestinians. If so, Trump would be departing sharply from the U.S.'s public diplomatic stance for more than 20 years. Since Trump won the U.S. election, Netanyahu's far-right government has announced the construction of hundreds of settlement housing units, as well as the first brand-new settlement in 2 decades in the Israeli-occupied West Bank. Trump's pick for ambassador to Israel, David Friedman, is a longtime political and financial supporter of Israel's settlements, which are illegal under international law. Prime Minister Netanyahu is a close friend of the Kushner family, Jared Kushner, an advisor to President Trump, and also his son-in-law. In Washington state, lawyers are suing the federal government over the arrest and detention of Daniel Ramirez Medina, who was arrested Friday by agents with Immigration and Customs Enforcement, or ICE, even though the 23-year-old has permission to live and work in the United States under President Obama's DACA program, that's Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals. His lawyers have called his detention unprecedented and unjustified. Ramirez was arrested when ICE agents came to his father's home and detained both men on Friday. Ramirez has been living in the United States since he was 7 years old. His family is originally from Mexico. He's now being imprisoned at Tacoma's Northwest Detention Center. Advocates say his detention may be the first of a DACA recipient since Trump took office. It came amidst a wave of ICE raids nationwide last week in which more than 600 people were arrested and detained. In California, authorities have lifted a mandatory evacuation order, allowing tens of thousands of residents near the Oroville Dam to return to their homes. Nearly 200,000 residents living near the nation's tallest dam were forced to evacuate over the weekend after erosion caused a hole to open up in the dam's emergency spillway, threatening to unleash a 30-foot wall of water onto nearby towns. Environmental groups had warned California officials more than a decade ago that the Oroville Dam's emergency spillway was at risk of erosion, but the officials ignored the warnings. Scientists say the season's record-breaking levels of rainfall in California, which has filled the Oroville Dam to the brink, is one of the latest examples of extreme weather caused by climate change. In more climate change news, preliminary data from the National Snow and Ice Data Center shows the sea ice around Antarctica has shrunk to the smallest annual extent ever recorded. Meanwhile, in Bolivia, a state of emergency over drought conditions has now been in place for over 100 days. Scientists say the drought is fueled by the retreat of Bolivian glaciers as a result of global warming. Protesters in Bolivia also say the water shortages have been worsened by government mismanagement and industrial mining projects. This is Bolivian President Evo Morales.
Perhaps global warming brings with it many issues. My concerns are in the Bolivian highlands. In January, there was a lot of rain, but now there is no rain. If it does not rain this month and the next month of March, we are going to have many problems with the issue of water.
Russia's foreign ministry says Russia will not relinquish control of Crimea, despite calls from the White House that Russia return the territory to Ukraine. On Wednesday, a Russian spokesperson said, quote, "We don't give back our own territory," unquote. Russia illegally annexed Crimea in 2014, prompting the U.S. and the European Union to impose sanctions. Russia's announcement comes as the U.S. is embroiled in the political scandal of former National Security Advisor Michael Flynn's resignation. After revelations, he discussed separate sanctions imposed against Russia with the Russian ambassador in late December and then lied about the phone call. Human Rights Watch says the Syrian government repeatedly and systematically deployed the chemical weapon chlorine gas against residents in Aleppo during the final weeks of a siege and battle to retake the city from anti-government rebels late last year. The report released Monday accuses Syrian military helicopters of dropping chlorine gas canisters on residential neighborhoods at least 8 times. Last week, Amnesty International published a shocking report accusing the Assad government of engaging in a deliberate policy of extermination by hanging thousands of civilians at the Saraya prison near Damascus. In China, mass protests have erupted against the proposed construction of a $6.7 billion aluminum plant in a city near the Siberian border. On Tuesday, thousands of people poured into the streets of Daqing for a third straight day of protests against the plant over concerns of pollution. Protesters say there are already 2 chemical plants in the city which they say have caused high levels of pollution. In the Dominican Republic, 2 radio journalists were shot dead Tuesday morning after gunmen opened fire in the middle of a broadcast on Facebook Live. Radio host Luis Manuel Medina of the program Hot Millennium was killed, and producer and director Leo Martinez at the station in San Pedro de Macorís in the middle of the live broadcast, during which one can hear the sound of a gunshot and then the words "Pito, pito," or shots, shots, before the video cuts out. And in more journalism news, back in the United States, the Wall Street Journal is facing accusations of being too favorable in its coverage of President Trump. On Monday, the Wall Street Journal's top editor, Gerard Baker, called a staff meeting to address internal dissent. The paper is owned by the conservative mogul Rupert Murdoch. Under Baker's direction, the Wall Street Journal ousted opinion editor Mark Laswell after blocking him from publishing editorials critical of President Trump. The paper refused to run a story about white supremacist support for Trump. Business Insider reports Baker even tried to avoid highlighting that the 7 countries included in Trump's travel ban were majority Muslim, instead suggesting to editors the nations be called terror hotspots. Meanwhile, the White House has given press credentials to a reporter with the far right-wing outlet The Gateway Pundit, one of the most fervently pro-Trump blogs. It's considered even farther to the right than Breitbart Media. Even conservative commentator Eric Erickson has criticized the move, writing, quote, "I'm not sure there's a greater purveyor of fake news. Gateway Pundit runs nonsense, and I still have not determined if it's intentional or just because of some level of insanity," Erickson wrote. And in healthcare news, Humana has announced it will no longer offer health insurance coverage in the Affordable Care Act state marketplaces, dealing another blow to Obamacare. The announcement came as Aetna said it was abandoning its plan to merge with Humana after the proposed $37 billion merger was blocked on antitrust grounds. Last year, Aetna announced it would cut its participation in the Affordable Care Act's marketplaces by 2/3. President Trump and Republicans have vowed to dismantle the Affordable Care Act. And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. The New York Times and CNN are reporting phone records and intercepted calls show that members of Donald Trump's presidential campaign had repeated contacts with senior Russian intelligence officials in the lead-up to the November elections. The Times reports U.S. law enforcement and intelligence agencies intercepted the communications around the same time they were discovering evidence that Russia was trying to disrupt the presidential election by hacking into the Democratic National Committee. The New York Times and CNN published their stories Tuesday night, less than 24 hours after Trump's national security advisor, Michael Flynn, resigned following revelations he spoke with the Russian ambassador about U.S. sanctions during a late December phone call. Former acting Attorney General Sally Yates had warned Trump's administration weeks ago that Flynn might be lying about the call, but the White House took no action for 17 days. Days after Yates issued the warning, Trump fired her for refusing to enforce his Muslim ban. Michael Flynn is at least the third Trump official to reportedly have ties to Russia. Others include Trump's former campaign chair, Paul Manafort, and former Trump advisor Carter Page. According to the New York Times, call records show Manafort was in touch with Russian officials before the election. Hours before the Times published its expose, White House Press Secretary Sean Spicer was questioned if anyone from the Trump campaign was in touch with Russia before the election.
Back in January, the president said that nobody in his campaign had been in touch with the Russians. Now, today, can you still say definitively that nobody on the Trump campaign, not even General Flynn, had any contact with the Russians before the election?
My understanding is that what General Flynn has now expressed is that during the transition period, well, we were very clear that during the transition period, he did speak with the ambassador.
I'm talking about during the campaign.
I don't have any. There's nothing that would conclude me that anything different has changed with respect to that time period.
And why would the president, if he was notified 17 days ago that Flynn had misled the vice president, other officials here, and that he was a potential threat to blackmail by the Russians, why would he be kept on for almost 3 weeks?
Well, that assumes a lot of things that are not true. The president was informed of this. He asked the White House counsel to review the situation. The first matter was whether there was a legal issue. And we had to review that whether there was a legal issue, which the White House counsel concluded there was not. As I stated in my comments, this was an act of trust.
On Tuesday morning, President Trump initially responded to Michael Flynn's resignation by tweeting, quote, "The real story here is why are there so many illegal leaks coming out of Washington? Will these leaks be happening as I deal on North Korea, etc.?" ? Earlier today, Trump tweeted, "The fake news media is going crazy with their conspiracy theories and blind hatred. MSNBC and CNN are unwatchable. Fox and Friends is great," he tweeted. He then added, "Information is being illegally given to the failing New York Times and Washington Post by the intelligence community, NSA and FBI, just like Russia," unquote. The pro-Trump website Breitbart.com has described the dismissal of Flynn as part of a deep state coup. On Capitol Hill, Congressman Elijah Cummings, the ranking Democrat on the House Committee on Oversight and Government Reform, called for a congressional probe into Trump's ties to Russia.
Why did Flynn continue to sit in on the most sensitive classified meetings until just 2 days ago? Ladies and gentlemen, something is wrong with that picture. Who at the White House? And I want the press to press these questions. Who at the White House decided to do nothing for 3 weeks as Flynn sat in on meeting after meeting after meeting? Did the president decide to wait? Did counsel decide to wait? Something is wrong here.
We go now to Washington, D.C., where we're joined by Democratic Congressman Ted Lieu of California, a member of the House Committee on Foreign Affairs, served on active duty in the U.S. Air Force, and continues to serve as a colonel in the Air Force Reserves. Congressman, welcome to Democracy Now! Your response, first of all, to the resignation, the forced resignation of General Mike Flynn as National Security Advisor.
Well, thank you, Amy, for that question. And let me say that, America, we have a problem. The President of the United States knew for weeks that his National Security Advisor lied to the Vice President, lied to the American people, and was vulnerable to blackmail by the Russians. And the President did nothing until the press exposed the truth a few days ago. That means the President placed the interests of Russia above that of the American people. That is not acceptable. And then we learned last night that Trump campaign aides had multiple contacts with Russian intelligence agents during the presidential campaign, and it's a safe bet to say they were not talking about the weather.
So talk about the significance of this. Again, what the allegations are is during the campaign, Manafort, among them, the campaign chair, didn't just have a conversation with, but repeated contacts with. What was the significance, and what do you understand was the context for these communications?
We don't know what the content of the conversations were, but the fact that they were even with Russian intelligence agents raises huge red flags. And because there were many of these contacts, that aggravates the red flags. And what this shows is there is now the possibility of collusion between the Trump campaign and the Russian government. If, in fact, there was collusion, that is a serious federal crime. And then it raises issues of what did Donald Trump know and when did he know it?
So let's talk about what did Donald Trump know and when did he know it. Flynn said in his resignation letter that he had inadvertently briefed the vice president-elect and others with incomplete information. Why do you think it took Trump weeks? I was also interested in Sean Spicer's White House press briefing yesterday, that he talked about the vice president and others were given that, according to the president, the vice president and others were given false information. They don't actually say that the president was.
Donald Trump, according to media reports, knew for weeks from the Department of Justice that Michael Flynn was vulnerable to blackmail by the Russians because he lied about the content of his conversations with the Russian ambassador when he told Vice President Pence that they did not discuss sanctions, when in fact they did. And Michael Flynn's resignation letter essentially confirms that fact. So Donald Trump knew you now had a U.S. National Security Advisor in that position who could be blackmailed by the Russians, and Donald Trump was okay with that until a few days ago when the press, and thank goodness for the press, exposed what had happened.
Let's turn to Donald Trump. Speaking in July, candidate Trump, when he called on Russia to hack Hillary Clinton's email.
Russia, if you're listening, I hope you're able to find the 30,000 emails that are missing. I think you will probably be rewarded mightily by our press.
That was in July. Congressman Lieu.
No American should ask a foreign government to hack another American's emails. That is completely unacceptable. And now Donald Trump is president of the United States, and we're learning more about the contacts of his campaign with the Russian government. We absolutely need a bipartisan congressional probe. This is serious. We have a Russia that has done this huge, massive cyber attack on the United States to influence our elections. I encourage everybody watching to go ahead and Google unclassified intelligence report. And you will see that this unclassified intelligence report on Russia shows that they hacked our government, they hacked 20 state election boards, and they try to undermine our democracy and help Trump and hurt Secretary Clinton. Highly disturbing.
President Trump is tweeting up a storm this morning. Among his tweets, this Russian connection nonsense is merely an attempt to cover up the many mistakes made in Hillary Clinton's losing campaign. Congressman Liu, your response.
That is a bizarre tweet. The press doesn't care at this point about Hillary Clinton's campaign. What they care about is, was there collusion between the Trump campaign and the Russian government? What are the connections between Trump associates and Russian intelligence agents? And what did Trump know and when did he know it? Because these are very serious allegations. These are the kind of allegations that get people sent to federal prison.
Ted Lieu, we're going to break and then come back to this discussion. Ted Lieu is Democratic congressman from California, member of the House Committee on Foreign Affairs, served on active duty in the U.S. Air Force and is a colonel in the Air Force Reserves. Among the things we want to talk about, actually Yemen as well, but also investigations by Congress, the Republican-led Congress. Where would they be? What committee? Stay with us. Nothing Feels Natural by Priests. This is Democracy Now!, DemocracyNow.org, the War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman as we continue our conversation with Congressman Ted Lieu of California in light of the latest revelations and the White House chaos that is underway right now. On Tuesday morning, President Trump initially responded to Michael Flynn's resignation by tweeting, quote, "The real story here is why are there so many illegal leaks coming out of Washington? Will these leaks be happening as I deal on North Korea, etc., unquote. On Tuesday afternoon, White House Press Secretary Sean Spicer was questioned about Trump's comment.
The president tweeted this morning, the real story is leaks, illegal leaks.
It is leaks. But if you think about this, understand that all of this information was leaked. I mean, I got to, and again, I know we've got this, me lecturing you about what stories should be, but I think that there's a real story here. The idea that not just in this administration, but the Obama administration, going back to the Bush administration and back, that we have an issue where classified information, of which this would be, is handled in such a way that it is being given out. And I know in some cases it's a good story, and I understand that, and that's to some degree your responsibility to write that. But I think there's also a story here where the amount of leaks that are coming out of people that are entrusted with national security secrets and classified information are leaking it out.
Glenn Greenwald of The Intercept wrote, "It's hard to put into words how strange it is to watch the very same people from both parties across the ideological spectrum who called for the heads of Edward Snowden, Chelsea Manning, Tom Drake, and so many other Obama-era leakers today heap praise on those who leak the highly sensitive, classified SIGINT information that brought down General Flynn." Again, those are the words of the Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist Glenn Greenwald, famous for going to Hong Kong and meeting with the whistleblower Ed Snowden. Ted Lieu, you're a Democratic congressman from California. Your response to this, you were praising the press, saying that the press has broken the story, showing the importance of an independent media. What about the importance of whistleblowers that provided this information? I mean, this is clearly coming from the intelligence community. What did the Senate Minority Leader, Chuck Schumer, recently say? He was shocked how President Trump was going after the intelligence community because he said, they'll get you this 6 ways from Sunday. But what about the importance of whistleblowers?
Well, let me first say that Congress has recognized the importance of whistleblowers for our democracy. That's why Congress passed the Whistleblowers Protection Act, as well as an enhancement to that act. I encourage all federal employees to read that law. In addition, there is a presidential directive, I believe it's number 19, that also provides certain protections when it comes to classified materials. And it's important that in a democracy that if people see evidence of wrongful misconduct, that they get that out so that people can do something about it. And in this case, I do want to commend the patriots and the whistleblowers that told America that basically Michael Flynn had lied to the vice president and lied to the American public. And we need a free and fair press that can expose these evidence and this kind of misconduct so the American people know what's actually happening with their own government.
So Michael Flynn is out. He resigned, but clearly a forced resignation with President Trump under enormous pressure for many days as this information was coming out. Then you have his counselor, Kellyanne Conway. Can you comment on this latest news of the Office of Government Ethics saying she violated the law? That the counselor violated the law, the federal ethics law rules, when she used a TV appearance on Fox to market merchandise sold by President Trump's daughter, Ivanka. She actually was following up on President Trump using his POTUS account to castigate the department store Nordstrom from Washington State for dropping the Ivanka line.
I can't even believe that I have to say this, but the White House shall not be used for the purpose of enriching the president's family. That is just basic common sense, but it's also federal regulation. So the federal regulations say that federal employees cannot promote or endorse a product such as Ivanka's product line. Kellyanne Conway did exactly that. She violated the federal regulation. Is very clear. Last week, I wrote a letter to the Office of Government Ethics asking them to take action. Very pleased that yesterday they wrote a letter saying that the White House needs to investigate and discipline Kellyanne Conway. I hope the White House does that.
And what about President Trump? Actually, she was just defending him. He used the government taxpayer-funded account, his Twitter account, his POTUS account, to retweet this comment about going after Nordstrom's, who said they made this decision because it, wasn't financially working out for them.
Donald Trump has, in many instances, placed America second and placed himself or his family first. That is wrong. But in addition, this is more evidence that Donald Trump has vast amounts of conflicts of interest, both in the United States as well as globally. And the United States Constitution says you can't actually have these foreign conflicts of interest. It's known as the Emoluments Clause, Article 1, Section 9. Donald Trump is in violation of that clause because he has all these global business holdings all across the world, and he's getting payments and gifts from these foreign countries and foreign entities. That's why I've created an illegitimacy clock. It's on my website. If you look at it, it tells you how many days and hours Donald Trump has been illegitimate as president because he's in violation of our Constitution.
So who should be investigating this right now, all of this, particularly the top news, what Michael Flynn knew, what President Trump knew most significantly, when he knew it, and what were these contacts that have been going on for a long time?
Congress should be doing this. Unfortunately, the Republicans that control the House of Representatives, I believe in 21 months, Democrats will take back the House, and then we will investigate. In addition, there are now lawsuits being filed against President Trump for his violation of the Constitution and the Emoluments Clause for his foreign conflicts of interest. Now, keep in mind, Donald Trump can resolve some of this just by disclosing his tax returns. Then we'll know, does he have special business holdings in Russia that we know about or in other countries? So, for example, with the Muslim ban that Donald Trump instituted, if you read it, the very first paragraph says the purpose of that ban is because of 9/11 and the horrific terrorist attack. And then they ban 7 countries that had nothing to do with 9/11. They don't ban the countries that did have something to do with 9/11. And is that because Donald Trump has business interests in those countries? I don't know. But if he would disclose his tax returns, then we would know if that's really the case.
I want to also ask you about Yemen, Congressman. The White House has warned journalists and lawmakers against criticizing a botched raid by U.S. commandos on a Yemeni village last month that left 25 civilians and 1 U.S. soldier dead, a Navy SEAL. The Bureau of Investigative Journalism reports the January 28th assault killed 9 children under the age of 13, with 5 other children wounded. Among those critical of the raid was Arizona Republican Senator John McCain.
When you lose a $75 million airplane, and more importantly, American lives are a life is lost and wounded, I don't believe that you can call it a success.
White House Press Secretary Sean Spicer lashed out at Senator McCain and at journalists for criticizing President Trump's decision to order the raid.
It's absolutely a success. And I think anyone who would suggest it's not a success does disservice to the life of Chief Ryan Owens. He fought knowing what was at stake in that mission. And anybody who would suggest otherwise doesn't fully appreciate how successful that mission was, what the information that they were able to retrieve was, and how that will help prevent future terrorist attacks. I understand that. I think my statement's very clear on that, Kristen. I think anybody who undermines the success of that raid owes an apology and a disservice to the life of Chief Owens.
Spicer's comments came as the United Nations appealed for $2.1 billion in emergency aid for Yemen. The UN warns 12 million people face the threat of famine brought on by the U.S.-supported Saudi-led war and naval blockade. Congressman Ted Lieu, you have requested a Pentagon briefing on the raid. Do you call it a spectacular success, as the White House has?
Having served on active duty, I am deeply offended by the comments coming from the White House by a president that has never served in the military and is now attacking people simply because people are raising issues about a military raid. What makes the American military so great is we learn from our mistakes. And what we want to do is learn what happened, not stifle dissent. And that's why I've concluded Donald Trump is a danger to the republic. He is stifling dissent. He is attacking institutions of democracy, such as the free press, such as the judiciary. This is what leads us down the road to authoritarianism. And specifically in Yemen, his White House press secretary said that it was a success by all standards. That is simply a lie. We lost a $75 million plane. We lost an American hero. 9 children were killed. That is not a success by all standards. We need to find out more about what happened with this raid. And we do know that the Reuters news agency reported that Donald Trump ordered the raid without adequate intelligence and without adequate ground support or adequate backup preparations. We need to find out what happened, not have dissent stifled.
And the comment that anyone who questions this raid in any way has to apologize to the Owens family because he died there, and that it is unpatriotic to do so.
Chief Owens is an American hero, and I believe one of the best ways to honor Chief Owens is to find out what happened in the raid and how the U.S. military can do better. That's how the United States military has always operated. That's how we should continue to operate. We need to learn, not to stifle dissent.
Congressman Lieu, you are introducing legislation that would require a psychiatrist in the White House. Can you explain what you're doing?
Sure. So we're looking at legislation, And let me just tell you the context for this. In 1928, Congress passed a law requiring that doctors be at the White House because Congress concluded that presidents are human beings, and like all human beings, we have our own frailties. Because of how people viewed mental health at the time, there was no psychiatrist or psychologist that was required. In the 21st century, we know that mental health is just as important as physical health. So it seemed to make sense that the White House should also have a psychiatrist or a psychologist available. I'm not the first to bring this up. Republican Chairman Jason Chaffetz told the Washington Post earlier this year that he thought the president should have an independent mental health exam. And I also know that in 2015, the National Defense Authorization Act, which was supported by over 300 members of Congress on a bipartisan basis, required incoming military recruits to get a mental health exam. Keep in mind, the president is also the commander-in-chief of our armed forces, and he can launch 4,000 nuclear weapons in a matter of minutes. So that's what we're looking at.
What makes you particularly concerned about President Trump's mental health?
Well, there is a structural issue where I believe that the demands of the presidency have increased significantly, especially since the advent of nuclear weapons, and the president should have the best treatment available. In terms of this bill, we're trying to see if this is the best way to go about it. Clearly, to me, when you have a president that lies pathologically, that believes in alternative facts, it suggests to me there is a problem. I don't know the extent of that problem. I don't know what the best solution is, but I do think that this issue should be raised. And so I raised the issue. It is a bipartisan issue, and we'll try and get more information and to see what's a good next step.
Before we finish this conversation, I wanted to ask you about North Korea. Right now, in his tweets, President Trump says he's very concerned about all these intelligence leaks, because what would it mean if they were doing this around North Korea? It certainly did not seem like that when he was learning of the North Korea missile launch in the middle of the public dining room at Mar-a-Lago, and you could see all those pictures that were put out of him having these conversations about what could be classified information among the diners, to their shock as well, and his aides shining flashlights so he could look at documents. But what about what's happening with North Korea?
Let me first address what you just said. We're about to send a letter asking for an investigation into what happened at his resort. His resort is not the White House Situation Room. It should not be treated as such. In addition, there's been some evidence that he's using an unsecured Android phone that can also be easily hacked. So we want to see if that's true or not. With regards to North Korea, that is a problem. North Korea is developing ballistic missile technology. They do have nuclear weapons. So the United States needs to work with our allies to try to reduce and mitigate this threat. Unfortunately, we have a president that has offended many of our allies from Mexico to Australia to countries in Europe. And hopefully this president will learn that the best way to handle dangers such as North Korea is to work with other countries, not offend them.
Ted Lieu, I want to thank you for being with us. Democratic congressman from Los Angeles, California, member of the House Committee on Foreign Affairs, served on active duty, U.S. Air Force, and continues to serve as a colonel in the Air Force Reserves. Thanks so much for being there. And, of course, we will also continue to cover these issues as they unfold. You can check updates at DemocracyNow.org. I'm Amy Goodman. When we come back, we look at one of the top aides to President Trump. His name is Stephen Miller. He's 31 years old. He's the former chief of staff of then-Senator Sessions, who's now the Attorney General. He would warm up the crowds at candidate Trump's campaign rallies in the last year. We'll bring on people who've investigated him and know him from high school. Stay with us.
Oh, you know your mother may talk about you. Whoa, your sisters and your brothers too. They don't care how you're trying to live. You know they talk about you still. Oh, but bear this in mind. don't you mind people grinning in your face? Oh, bear this in mind. A good friend is hard to find. Oh, don't you mind people grinning in your face? Oh, you know the grin in your face. You know they jump you up and down. Oh, soon as your back is turned, you know they try and beat you down. Oh, but bear this in mind. A good friend is hard to find. Oh, don't you mind?
People Grinning in Your Face by Ruthie Foster here on Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. As we turn to Stephen Miller, President Donald Trump's senior White House policy advisor. Over the weekend, Miller appeared on the major networks to defend Trump's travel ban. Speaking on the CBS program Face the Nation Sunday, Miller said Trump's authority will not be questioned.
The end result of this, though, is that our opponents, the media, and the whole world will soon see, as we begin to take further actions, that the powers of the president to protect our country are very substantial and will not be questioned.
Viewers took to Twitter to blast Miller's appearance as scripted and robotic, but Trump expressed glowing approval, tweeting, quote, "Congratulations, Stephen Miller, on representing me this morning on the various Sunday morning shows. Great job," unquote. Several reports have identified 31-year-old Stephen Miller as the architect of Trump's controversial executive order that temporarily banned people from 7 Muslim countries from entering the United States. Miller reportedly also wrote Trump's aggressively nationalist inauguration speech along with Trump's chief strategist, Steve Bannon, and in July penned a draft of Trump's acceptance speech to the Republican Presidential Convention. Miller's central role in the Trump administration has been drawing praise from white nationalist leader Richard Spencer, who famously coined the term alt-right to describe the insurgent right-wing movement that's attracted white nationalists and supremacists. Spencer told Mother Jones last year, quote, "Stephen is a highly competent and tough individual, so I have no doubt he'll do a great job," unquote. Prior to serving as top aide to Trump's presidential campaign, Stephen Miller worked as a former staffer for then-Republican Senator Jeff Sessions of Alabama, the new attorney general, who has a record of opposing the Voting Rights Act, supporting anti-immigration legislation, and making racist comments. Well, for more, we're joined by 2 guests. In Miami, Florida, we're joined by Fernando Penedo, a national political reporter at Univision. His new piece is headlined, "How White House Advisor Stephen Miller Went from Pestering Hispanic Students to Designing Trump's Immigration Policy." And in Los Angeles, we're joined by Cynthia Santiago, who attended Santa Monica High School with Stephen Miller. She was the first Latina president of the school's associated student body. Santiago is currently an immigration defense attorney who recently assisted people impacted by Trump's travel ban at LAX at the Los Angeles airport. Fernando and Cynthia, welcome to Democracy Now! Fernando, let's begin with you. Why did you take on this as a subject for Univision?
Well, as you can imagine, for us, immigration topics are very important, but our audience wants to know. And, well, it turns out that Mr. Miller, he went to this high school in Santa Monica where he studied, he woke up politically and developed his hardline positions. At that time, he started writing in articles for the student newspapers and other local newspapers. He contributed to conservative radio shows. And in this high school, it turned out that Latinos are the most important minority. So we decided to take a closer look into those years and talk to students who knew him.
And talk about what you found. Univision obtained a video made by 4 of his high school classmates for an audiovisual production class at the time. The video contains fragments of a brief 90-second speech by Miller during his junior year at Santa Monica High School in the spring of 2002, including a controversial reference to the job of janitors.
Yes, exactly.
Let's play the clip.
I'm Stephen Miller. Some of you may or may not know who I am. We don't have time to get into that right now. I'm the only candidate up here who really stands out. I will say and I will do things that no one else in their right mind would say or do. Am I the only one who is sick and tired of being told to pick up my trash when we have plenty of janitors who are paid to do it for us?
That was Stephen Miller speaking in his junior year at Santa Monica High School in 2002. Now, Donald Trump's senior White House policy advisor. Comment on what he said, Fernando. That quote, if you could go ahead.
Okay, I talked with one of his best friend at the time, Chris Moritz. He said it was just a joke. But actually, he made that comment before around 2,000 students in the amphitheater of the school. And many students I interviewed, they said that this comment was perceived as offensive because the janitors were all people of color. It turned out that students that I interviewed, they described Miller as a provocateur. Some said that he enjoyed offending people, and some even described incidents, altercations, in which Miller said things like, speak English, this is America, to students who spoke Spanish in the hallways. And that's what they told me.
Cynthia Santiago, when did you come to know Stephen Miller? Talk about his views in high school, your experience of him there, and what you're seeing today with him in one of the highest positions in the White House advising President Trump.
Yes. When I was in high school, about my junior year, which is the same junior year of 2002, I first came across an article that he had written for a local newspaper. And in that article, he made reference to Latino students that he basically said lacked basic English skills. And in that same article, he made a reference that there was some causal link, that the reason that would be the reason why these Latino students were not in the honors classes. He pointed out that there was a small number of Latino students in honors classes, and therefore it was because of their lacking basic English skills. These comments were very degrading because he made an overgeneralization. He didn't make a link, or he didn't even try to address the issues of academic inequality and disparity in access to those classes. So those are some of the statements he made, and that's when I became aware of him and aware that he was starting to provide more commentary. He was starting to have more interactions with students, and he also made those statements to some students about speaking English only in this country. And so those were signs
can you elaborate
that he
on
would
that?
use generalizations of people.
Cynthia, can you elaborate on that, about the issue of speaking English only and his views on this, what he talked about in high school?
So in high school, I was also a member of Movimiento Estudiantil Chicano-Chicana de Aztlán. It's MECHA, and it promoted cultural heritage and pride in your background, but it also promoted, an access to higher education. And he was known to go to those meetings and stand outside and harass some of the members that were trying to leave those meetings. So I believe that the statements about English only were because he viewed these groups, the groups of pride and heritage, as being groups that didn't promote American values.
Can you talk about a speech he gave? I think you were on the stage at the time of this speech when he ran for election in the Santa Monica High School.
I was a candidate for the student body president, and I was also on stage. And when he said this speech, immediately students were reacting to him, and you can tell that in the video, that students were booing and students were getting louder because they were extremely, upset about this kind of statement because a lot of students perceive these as statements of racist statements because the janitors at our campus were individuals, Latino and African American janitors. It also,
and for those who couldn't quite hear the video, I just at the end of that clip that we played, Stephen Miller said, "Am I the only one sick and tired of being told to pick up our trash when we have plenty of janitors who are paid to do it for us?"
And generally, most students also felt, even though we were teenagers, that that we viewed our custodians, our janitors on campus as people deserving of dignity and respect. And those statements were not, they were quite the contrary of what you would treat staff and individuals and human beings.
I wanted to ask Fernando Penado about what radicalized Stephen Miller. Now, some might be saying, why are you going back to high school? That's a real stretch. Now, for someone like, President Trump, he's 70 years old. But for someone like Stephen Miller right now, he's 31 years old. So high school is less than 15 years away. I wanted to turn to comments by Stephen Miller during his appearance on Fox News Sunday, speaking about recent immigration raids.
Right now, as a result of the president's order, greatly expanded and more vigorous immigration enforcement activities are taking place. It is true that Operation Crosscheck is something that happens every year. But this year, we've taken new and greater steps to remove criminal aliens from our communities.
Before we go back to Fernando, I wanted to ask Cynthia, what you're doing now, 15 years after high school, is you are involved in challenging what many have called, including President Trump, the Muslim ban. What Stephen Miller has so clearly defended and many say helped to craft. Your thoughts?
Yes, it's very unsettling that a person with these types of views, or a person, that expressed these views many years ago and still seems to express them, is in a position of authority. And if he was part of that team that crafted this is unsettling because it truly doesn't represent a person who values what it is, the balance of power, rights in this country, the branches of government. And so it is unsettling and frightening that someone could be in a position as he holds without some extreme vetting to determine if he's able to be in that position, given his views.
And finally, Fernando, what radicalized him? He talks about reading the works of Wayne LaPierre of the National Rifle Association. What was your sense from what you found?
Well, my sense from what I found is that he caught the attention of well-known conservatives nationally, and he spoke of them as mentors. So I guess he was encouraged by these well-known figures to follow this path. And but he has said that it was this reading about the Second Amendment, about gun rights, that made him discover these ideas. And then the thing is, when he started writing a lot, he paid a lot of attention to issues of race and culture. He started this war against multiculturalism, and he started advocating for assimilation, total assimilation. He finds it un-American to express other identities that he doesn't perceive as American. That he perceives them as foreigner, as foreign.
Fernando Penado and Cynthia Santiago, we thank you both for being with us. Fernando with Univision, Cynthia attended Santa Monica High School with Stephen Miller, currently an immigration defense attorney in Los Angeles. And that does it for our show. Go to democracynow.org. I'm Amy Goodman. Thanks for joining us.